Okay, so we've got a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Colin here. Colin, you are the Executive Vice President of Capital Markets at Mega Matrix, which is now really focusing on the legislation and enabling people to have proper understanding of what digital assets can do for them and giving them products around that. And now there's a lot that's happening around stable coins and just the way the understanding of digital assets from a classification standpoint is. So it's quite an exciting time to be in crypto. So I'm excited to have you here and to get into your story and what you guys are building.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I really appreciate your inviting me onto the show. I'm excited.
Yeah, awesome. So Colin, just kind of before we get into anything else, I'm curious, like, how did you get interested in crypto? It seems like everybody has their own story of how they found out about crypto and then when they decided to become a builder in the space. What made you interested?
Yeah, that's actually a short story, and I'll tell it. But I think most interesting about your pod, about the theme of legends and leaders, is that it's really cool to understand like how people's journey evolved originally. Like I love listening to like Mark Cuban talk about before he made it big, like before he hit on his first idea. And I think that's, in my view, what 90% of people that probably watch these like would love to hear, because it's like, what do you do before you're sitting in the seat on the show? What do you do before you're like at the Mavericks game and you own the Mavericks, or whatever it is that Mark likes to do. And oddly enough, I've never actually told my story. I've never actually told the original story. It's like my wife and I, we grew up very, very modestly. Like she literally had a dirt floor. She has a story where her mom came into the kitchen one day, and because they had like concrete. It was like, I don't know, it was in Brazil. And she said her mom found this snake and it was like about to bite her, right? It was like had nothing. And I came not exactly from that, right? I grew up in the US. We weren't like that, but we were very, very middle class, I would say. And you grow up in a small town and you're like, what do I do with my life? Like my high school guidance counselor suggested I become a carrot farmer. And my parents were irate. They're like, no, but at the same time, I grew up in a small town outside of Seattle. It's like there's no investment banking, there's no Wall Street, there's certainly no crypto, no AI, nothing like that. Nothing like that was available to us. It was like you're either going into the military or you're going to work in the sawmill down the street. And so, I never realized that like what Wall Street or crypto was back then, but you realize that you don't want to be like those guys. Like they were hanging out in the woods, like drinking PBR, like no offense to people that like to do that, right? Because I think there's a place for that. But like, it was like, that wasn't where I wanted to be. And I didn't know what like a dream life looked like, but I knew that I wasn't going to be what everyone else was going to be. And so I grew up like kind of awkward, right? It's like, the guy who's the coolest guy in high school is the guy on the football team. And unfortunately for that guy, man, that's not a good look when you're like, 21 and 22 even. And then if you do the right things in life and if you work really hard on yourself, you become like the people that you became, that you interview, where they lead these amazing lives. It's hard to even comprehend what those lives look like for people that don't even have access to friends with those lives, but anyone can do it. And so my journey into, I guess, crypto or Wall Street started with just this like massive ambition to get out of there, to get away from the life that I didn't want. And so for me, it started with breaking into Wall Street, right? Like, so I traded when I was a teenager, actually, before I could even hold a brokerage account. And I traded to put myself through school. It's like my passion, like trading stocks. But from my town, it's like no one goes to New York, right? No one goes to good school, the great like Ivy League schools where you have a track that leads you onto that path. And so basically, like the start of my journey was this belief that I wanted to become an institutional trader with no background, with no contacts. Only like the belief was that I was a great trader, because this is like late 90s, like everyone, you put money in the market and like everything's going up and you're like, man, I could make a living at this. Like I am phenomenal. Of course, it's really just driven by the market at the time. But because I wanted to be a trader, I stayed in a hostel in New York. I moved to New York and I stayed in a hostel. My dad had bought me a $150 suit at like the place in our town. It was like $100 suit, and I had a tie. And I found a $20 place because I didn't have any money. And I stayed in Midtown Manhattan, not knowing anyone in the city, not knowing anything. And I literally walked into the investment banks with my resume. And you can imagine how that went, right? It didn't go well, right? Like you walk into Credit Suisse and there's this bay of people there that are designed to keep people out. And you're like, listen, I want to talk to somebody here. I am a great trader and I want to work here more than anything else. and I got rejected by 50 places in New York, right? Because again, like there's no way to talk to anyone. And I think the breakthrough was my school at the time, University of Washington. I'm the beneficiary of massive reservation inflation because since I went there, it was like Microsoft and Amazon, and now it's a great school that people know. Back when I graduated, nobody knew it. And so we had one alumni in New York at the time that worked in the middle office on Wall Street. You know, he wasn't like on the trading floor or anything like that. And really amazing guy. And I'm really thankful that he took a meeting with me. And there's only a few guys like that I was able to meet, and like none were even in roles like later on that I would even want. But what had happened was after I graduated, 9/11 happened. So the economy was tanking and 30% of the Wall Street workforce was being laid off. And I wasn't getting anywhere. Like I was walking to these places with my resume, you know, I sleep in the hostel. I walk out all day in my tie and like eat in places that I didn't know and just try to literally find like, where's Goldman Sachs, you know, walk in, try to do my thing. And man, it's hard. Like it's really hard in case no one's done that, right? Most people probably haven't. It's hard to get that rejection. And it's just hard, like not knowing what you're doing at all. So after getting rejected by a bunch of these places, and this guy was at Morgan Stanley, and I told him, you know, what I was doing. And he said, listen, like no one's getting hired right now. Like even the guys whose dads work at Goldman Sachs and went on track, like they went to Harvard or Yale, like, they're not getting hired right now. And he said, what I think you could do, and this is kind of a weird, I don't know if my memory is correct, but he basically said, listen, like there's a small asset management presence in San Diego, like a couple of hedge funds. And maybe what you should do is you surf and you check out chicks on the beach until the whole recession thing blows over. And I did, because I was getting shut out of New York. Like nothing was happening for me in the financial capital of the world because I was an outsider, right? Came from a non-targeted school is what they called it, with no real background, no real connections, in an environment that was the worst in, you know, since I don't know when, right? Maybe since the 1920s. And so I went back to San Diego and I did the same thing. I actually had a grandma that I could live with, at least sleep on her floor. And I did the same thing. I walked into places. I saw, you know, the sign that said, oh, NASD SIPC, right? So Wall Street affiliate. And I walked into those places and the same thing happened. I got shut out, rejection after rejection. And the crazy thing is after about 6 months of that, being down there, and I was also studying for the GMAT at the time and, you know, thinking through like, what was I going to do with my life? Because there was no options for people of that vintage. And eventually I walked into a place and it happened to be a startup investment bank. There was 3 people in the place, and it turns out that the founder just started it, and he was the #1 market maker in Cisco Systems at the time. It became the largest stock in the world. This is the late like 90s, like very early thousands. And I said, listen, I will do anything to work here. Like I will work for free. I'll bring you coffee. And I knew that they were going to be big because they had the 6-screen trading setups, right? They were an institutional shop, like just starting out. And it was a dream for me. Like I knew that that was my dream. And so I convinced these guys to just let me come hang out like 2 to 3 days a week. And I worked at Red Lobster at the time at night just to fund like my living. And about a month into my being an intern at this place, like an unpaid intern, the boss called me in and he said, we just hired this guy. He's the #1 biotech trader in the country. And we just hired him. And now there's room for you. And so you start on Monday at $2,000 a month. And I was like, thank you. I will not let you down. I'm going to be the best hire you've ever had. And so I think part of, I guess, the story for legends and leaders is really that you do need, you need adversity, right? You need to overcome. Looking back, like, and my wife has even crazier story. But looking back, you're like, I don't really wish that on anyone because I remember the scars, like the battle scars that you get from this stuff. And it feels like lashes. It's just like lashes. I remember the feeling very vividly of how hard that stuff was. And, so while you don't wish it on anyone, you recognize that that's how people that get to a certain level get to that level, is like they had to go through things that are almost impossible, right? Like it'd be impossible to realize the dream from where I'm from, but people do it, right? They do it all the time. So I guess the vision that I would share for people, that watch the pod, Legends and Leaders, is that like you can do this. Like anyone can do this. It just takes an incredible amount of self-belief, grit, hard work, and quite frankly, luck. It's like that, that like 100th place that I went into was the hit that made my career. And actually, early on, like what happened was the founder had a father who was an actual legend in business. He was a legend on Wall Street. He was like friendly with like, kind of the Michael Milken or the Warren Buffett or Peter Lynch from Fidelity. And because I just stuck it out for so long after massive rejection, eventually I got on board with him, became his right-hand man. And, I don't want to say the rest is history, but that really was the break that I needed in my career. And so, ultimately it spent 20-ish years on Wall Street before transitioning into crypto. And I guess here we are.
How did the crypto transition happen?
Crypto transition happened because probably similar, right? Like Wall Street was kind of coming to an end. Computers were trading. I don't even know what the business looks like. Like back in my day, it was like you're calling people and giving bids and offers. And it was really fun business early on. But I think it's very different now. It's like you almost, have to have a PhD in physics to really make it well there. But I had a friend that called me and he said, I'm going into crypto. This was like 2021. And at the time, everyone has their red pill journey, right? Like at first, so one of my friends put it really well. He said, it doesn't make any sense until it makes all the sense in the world, right? Like early on Bitcoin, it's like, but it's backed by nothing. Like what's, why does that have value at all? And then you go into like digital gold and transferability and only X number of tokens. But before that, before you get red pilled, you're just thinking this is nonsense, right? Like what are you talking about? And so I think that was my mentality. I think when I was raising capital for a hedge fund from 2016 to 2018, I got calls from these crypto funds and they said, hey, you want to come raise capital for a crypto fund? I was like, absolutely not. Right. Like I listen to Jamie Dimon and Nuriel Rubini, right? I know Nuriel personally. And these guys were like, this is based on nothing. Like this should have zero value. And I believe them. And so I rejected all the ideas, right? And in retrospect, man, those would have been good gigs, but it's hard to underwrite at the time. And so years later, my friend called me and he was also in the business of raising capital for alternative investment managers, hedge funds, things like that. And he said, I'm going to crypto. I'm going to go raise money for a crypto fund. I was like, good luck with your career, right? Great way to never get another phone call again. But I asked him why. I said, okay, well, tell me why. Like he's a smart guy, right? He's been around a long time. And so he said, well, one, remember this guy that we were friendly with a couple of years ago, young guy, like in his mid-20s, says that guy made $20 million in the last 4 years. And I'm like, this guy, like, what are you talking about? He's like, yeah, he started a crypto fund. He made 20 million bucks, I think on Axie Infinity. And he went on to say, he said the best performing hedge fund was up 2,400% last year. And in our business, we're trying to make like 10 or 20%, and you are a hero. Like if you can do 10 to 20% years as a hedge fund manager, you are, you're in the money, you're retiring, man. You're like really killing it. And so I almost didn't believe him. I was like, what are you talking about? 2,400%. Doesn't make sense. But I think it was Multicoin at the time, Multicoin Capital with Kyle Samani. And they were putting up these returns because they could invest in things that made an exponential return in a very short period of time. And so I started looking into it. And I think at first you read the Bitcoin Standard, which is a phenomenal book. I would recommend anyone interested in crypto to read that, because I think that's the baseline for the thesis of why crypto is so powerful. It's so important. And then you watch the Netflix special, like the Cryptopians, and you kind of get these ideas. Did you watch the Cryptopians?
Yeah.
Or I forget whatever it was
called. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, there was like 2 or 3 of them. And then the one guy on there, he's like, put 1% of your money in Bitcoin. And it's like one weekend, on a ski vacation. But there's a chance that becomes all your money. And he goes, right, because if it goes 1,000x, it's literally going to be all of your net worth. And so, his thesis at the time was there's a bunch of them, right? Like, what do we say in crypto? It's inflation, right? The government is inflating away everyone's savings, including the US. There are just so many themes for crypto that make it relevant. And so stuff like this really resonated. And so I bought it. I got double red pilled. And I became so excited about crypto. I just started studying it day and night, study. And my wife was like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm going into crypto. Like I couldn't even sleep. It was like every cell in my body told me I had to do this. And again, this is a backdrop of like nothing really happening on Wall Street. Nothing's that interesting. But crypto is wildly exciting. It became to me like software is eating the world. it became very clear in my mind that this was going to be huge. This was the next big thing. It was happening. And even in 2021, it was like not a lot of people that I knew even had a thought on it. So that was really how I got excited about the business. Is I had a friend, and I want to call the guy even now. I owe him a call because I'm like, man, thank you, because crypto became this big thing, right? Now, even in the most recent elections, like the president of the United States talking about it a lot. And so I'm really thankful for that journey. And then early on, when you join a place like I joined Polygon, and Polygon, maybe people don't remember now, but it was like a top 10 token. It was like $29 billion at peak. That's a big company. And you weirdly enough became like crypto famous. Like I had people stop me in the street. I had a Polygon hoodie on. People like, you work for Polygon. Oh my God. And it was strange. Like people that kind of like knew me because I was running institutional capital at the time. And like my wife was like, what is going on? And I said, baby, like in a very, very dark, small corner of the internet, I'm internet famous, right? And it's not even true anymore. Like people like Polygon, like, I don't know, Colin, I don't know. But at the time there was this like excitement around the tech that was, it was just very niche, but it was very cool. Anyway, not to get off topic, but that's kind of how I got into crypto. That's how I really got interested and got my start in the business.
So kind of going back to what you're doing now, like how did this become your focus and what are you mostly trying to accomplish at this point?
Yeah, so the business has these themes that they kind of pivot, right? There was like NFTs and DeFi summer. But for me, I'd always had this institutional bent because my career was Wall Street. So the very natural transition for me is thinking about how this could rewire the global financial system. That was the big idea in my mind. And it was a natural thing for me to work on because I knew a lot about the traditional financial system and I started to know a decent amount about crypto. And there's very few people at the time like practicing merging what they now call like TradFi and DeFi, right? Traditional finance and decentralized finance. That wasn't really a thing when I was starting in crypto, at least not for a lot of people, not for a lot of serious people, I should say. And so for me, it was a great way to meet like all the major players, right? You meet the people at Goldman and JP Morgan and BlackRock doing it, the very senior people, because there's only like 100 people in the space that are really focused on that part of it. And now, fast forward to last week when DTCC rolls out. For the people that don't know, DTCC settles really every stock transaction in the US. It's like $3 quadrillion a year. That's $3,000 trillion worth of settlement. It's these guys have more money than God, or they settle more money than God. And they're now running on, they're looking to run on crypto rails. So for me, it was access to people like that, like literally disintermediating many of the major banks and payment providers. And so that was more my vision, right? That's what I wanted to work on. I didn't want to sit down at Thanksgiving dinner and tell my mom I was building a casino for people to trade JPEGs, right? That was the NFT like joke, right? It's like, what are you doing? Well, I trade monkeys that are smoking cigarettes. It's like, no, I wanted people, I wanted for myself to be proud of my career, to be working on something that I thought was tangible and real, so to speak. So it was really a lot of real world assets. It was putting funds on chain, stocks on chain, creating real utility for people like dollar plus yield, which dovetails into what I'm doing now, like the stablecoin conversation. Why are stablecoins interesting? One of the really interesting things is you can rewire the global collateral market, which is $25 trillion, on sort of call it like a blockchain rail in the form of a stablecoin, and you can get 5% while you wait, right? You have an investment, maybe a derivatives investment, not to get too technical. You put up 10% of that trade as collateral, and instead of getting 0%, you're getting 5%. And it changes wildly the math behind, first off, you're an asset manager. It's like your return profile is like exponentially different than it was before, because you're trying to get 5% before. Now you're just getting 5% as the baseline, or in the current interest rate environment, like 3.75%, maybe, right? But then you get into things like, like Athena that can provide additional yield on top of stable coins, right? Not just the base rate, but base rate plus, 300 to 500 basis points. And all of a sudden you're talking about just a wildly different world where everybody from, the person that's trying to save in the Philippines that's getting 0% yield, right? And they're being inflated away, like that person is never going to be able to save for retirement based on what they're doing now. And in theory, crypto, actually in practice now, these people now have access to dollar, first off, US dollar, right? Think about what they're saving in the Philippines right now. It's like the Filipino fiat currency. It has, I don't know what the inflation rate is, but it's probably a lot far north of 3%. So when you get dollar that you can now save in, and you get yield on top of that, and it becomes a wildly different world for people that, one, didn't have access to the traditional financial system like you and I do right here in the US. And two, it gives them access to a new future financial system that is much better, much faster, much cheaper, and ultimately a much more high octane way to save for people's everything, right? I don't know what the people in the Philippines are saving for, like probably just to like survive another year. But here in the US, you're trying to save for your children's college fund, you're trying to save for retirement. And in a world where it's so hard to do that, right, with what's happening, the deficit and government debt and people's savings, dollar savings being eroded constantly, now what I hope is that this gives people some chance of actually beating that system that's really stacked against most people at this point. And it gives them an opportunity to participate in the system that allows them to kind of get out of that trap of not really having the capacity to pay for the things that they want to, even after years of hard work and saving.
So the role that you guys are going to play in this, I mean, you talk about the different opportunities for stablecoins to really change how the financial world works. Where is Mega Matrix going to have the most amount of impact, do you think?
What I think is it will give equity investors or stock investors a way to play stablecoin growth. So that's number one. I would say that's the current mission. That's like step one in a much broader vision of like, how do you really help people? But the first step is to give the 4,000 hedge funds in the US access to an investment theme for which they had no access prior. And so what that means in my mind is, let's say right now stablecoins have a supply of $300 billion. Like that's the total stablecoin supply.
Right.
And in the next 4 to 5 years, there's a very likely scenario where that 300 billion becomes 3 trillion. It's a 10x. It's an exponential growth story. Where that comes from is, well, one, it comes from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He says 3 trillion in 2030. Standard Chartered would also share a similar estimate. So there's higher and lower estimates. But basically what that means is stablecoins will have 10x growth in the next 3 to 4 years. And right now, equity investors or stock investors that are starved for returns, right? Like outside of AI, nothing is really growing, or most of the rest of the market is not really growing right now. It's very stagnant. And this theme offers them, 20, 30, 40, 50% returns a year on your way from 300 billion to 3 trillion. And right now, if you're a stock investor, you have only one pure play to express an investment opinion on stablecoins, and that's actually Circle. Right now, if you say, okay, I buy that and I want to invest in that theme, you have to buy Circle as a pure play. It's the main stablecoin provider that's publicly traded. And so what we at Mega Matrix want to do is provide investors a second option. And right now that would be by buying a basket of stablecoins, both governance tokens and stablecoins themselves, and giving you really that second way to express an investment opinion. The difference here is that we would be buying really on-chain stablecoins like Athena, like Hyperliquid has one, like Sky. These are kind of like the DeFi native stablecoin protocols that create synthetic dollars that actually create higher yields than even like USDC or Tether. And so one, it gives you exposure to the theme, right? It's like a 10x growth theme in 3 to 5 years. And then within that, we think these things can be specific growers within a larger secular growth story to the tune of, I don't know what they could be, but we would have models that would say like it's a 5 or a 10x, right? If you buy the Athena token, ENA right now, I could argue, I could create a financial model for you right now, back in the napkin, as to why this thing could be 5 to 10x where it is now within a very short period of time. So there's tremendous upside to these specific tokens, specific vehicles. And that is within the context of a much larger, what I would call a secular theme, which is stablecoins.
Do you think that crypto is going to become like a mass market form of currency people, exchange all the time, besides like remittances and maybe replacing the wire, but like as a form of currency that you're using to buy a Starbucks or, something like that?
I do, because I think there's got to be a better way,
Mm.
right? It makes sense to me to go to Starbucks and pay in a currency that is not US dollar denominated, because US dollar is being inflated away. There's various estimates, but let's just call it 3% to go with the conservative current government estimate. And in addition to that, while you have your Starbucks points or even your crypto, it's also getting 5% on top of that. Like, why would you not do that if that's available and if it's consistent and if it's secure? I think everybody should be doing that. It's just a much better financial system.
So what are your biggest goals right now, Colin? This is just the last question I have. Like what is the goals you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, let's start by really what I call like launching the product at scale. Like, let's make it successful in giving investors a scalable way to enter into the stablecoin market. And that means raising capital, creating a presence, creating awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And then the steps beyond that are really to get the underlying products in the hands of investors. So back to the Starbucks example, like, how do you, assuming this works, how do you get people spending Athena tokens at Starbucks or whatever it is? That's probably the step after just really getting the product launched at scale. What the product looks like, just to make it really easy for people to understand, it's MicroStrategy, which Michael Saylor, I think, did a really phenomenal job at making very famous, very well known for stablecoins.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. And so that's really step one, is evangelizing and branding a product that looks like that and making it big and making it really a way for, one, for average folks to save for retirement. Like, they can also invest in this, right? You can go out, open your Robinhood account and buy shares of Mega Matrix with a focus on stablecoins. And then second, like, really evangelizing what this technology can do for the 1.4 billion people in the world that are unbanked.
Yeah.
And that's really where you can get into the stuff that I find exciting. Like, how do you really, really help people with this stuff? Not just make the richer, right? The hedge funds get like 20% returns, and the portfolio manager gets a bigger bonus. He gets a bigger house in Vail. But how do you really affect people's lives? And I think that's the stuff that I want to get into, down the road. But first things first, right? Like, really go to market with a big product that can scale and make that a successful product on the way to the things that I think we're all really passionate about, which is really helping people.
That's awesome. Well, Colin, I appreciate you taking the time and doing this. I think it's a fascinating idea, what you guys have here. And I mean, like you mentioned, the success of Michael Saylor. I mean, there's clearly a need for something like this. And, it just adds up. I mean, I think a lot more people want to have savings that aren't as affected by inflation. And this is a great solution. So I'm excited to see you help a lot of people with it and what's to come next. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah,